Good evening, my friends. It's Indiana Homes for Story Time, and we continue with the Jules Verne novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We begin tonight with Part 2, Chapter 4, The Red Sea. In the course of the day of the 29th of January, the island of Ceylon disappeared under the horizon, and the Nautilus, at a speed of 20 miles an hour, slid into the labyrinth of the canals which separate the Maldives from the Laccadives. It coasted even the island of Kiltan, a land originally coralline, discovered by Vasco da Gama in 1499, and one of the 19 principal islands of the Laccadive archipelago, situated between 10 degrees and 14 degrees 30 north latitude and 69 degrees 50 72 east longitude. We made this 16,220 miles or 7,500 leagues from our starting point in the Japanese seas. The next day, the 30th of January, when the Nautilus went to the surface of the ocean, there was no land in sight. Its course was north-northeast, in the direction of the Sea of Oman, between Arabia and the Indian Peninsula, which serves as an outlet to the Persian Gulf. It was evidently a block without any possible egress. Where the Captain Nemo taking us to? We could not say. This, however, did not satisfy the Canadian, who that day came to me asking where we were going. We are going where Captain fancies to take us, Master Ned. His fancy cannot take us far, then, said the Canadian. The Persian Gulf has no outlet, and if we do go in, it will be long before we are out again. Very well, then, we will come out again, Master Land. And if, after the Persian Gulf, the Nautilus would like to visit the Red Sea, the Straits of Bab el Mandeb are there to give us entrance. I need not tell you, sir, said Ned Land, that the Red Sea is as much closed as the Gulf, as the Isthmus of Suez is not yet cut, and if it was, a boat as mysterious as ours would not risk itself in a canal cut with sluices. And again, the Red Sea is not the road to take us back to Europe. But I never said we were going back to Europe. What do you suppose, then? I suppose that, after visiting the curious coasts of Arabia and Egypt, the Nautilus will go down the Indian Ocean, again, perhaps across the channel of Mozambique, perhaps off the Mascarenas, so as to gain the Cape of Good Hope. And once the Cape of Good Hope? Asked the Canadian with peculiar emphasis. Well, we shall penetrate into the Atlantic, which we do not yet know. Ah, friend Ned, we are getting tired of this journey under the sea. You are surfeited with the incessantly varying spectacle of submarine wonders. For my part, I shall be worried to see the end of this voyage, which it is given to so few men to make. For 4 days, till the 3rd of February, the Nautilus scoured the Sea of Oman at various speeds and at various depths. It seemed to go at random, as if hesitating as to which road it should follow, but we never passed the Tropic of Cancer. In quitting this sea, we sighted Muscat, for an instant, one of the most important towns of the country of Oman. I admired its strange aspect, surrounded by black rocks upon which its white houses and forts stood in relief. I saw the rounded domes of its mosques, the elegant points of its minarets, its fresh and verdant terraces. But it was only a vision. The Nautilus soon sank under the waves of that part of the sea. We passed along the Arabian coast of Mahara and Hadramaut for a distance of 6 miles, its undulating line of mountains being occasionally relieved by some ancient ruin. The 5th of February, we at last entered the Gulf of Aden, a perfect funnel introduced into the neck of the Bab el Mandeb, through which the Indian waters entered the Red Sea. The 6th of February, the Nautilus floated in sight of Aden, perched upon a promontory which a narrow isthmus joins at the mainland, a kind of inaccessible Gibraltar, the fortifications of which were rebuilt by the English after taking possession in 1839. I caught a glimpse of the octagon minarets of this town, which was at one time the richest commercial magazine on the coast. I certainly thought that the Captain Nemo, arrived at this point, would back out again, but I was mistaken, for he did no such thing, much to my surprise. The next day, the 7th of February, we entered the Straits of Bab el Mandeb, the name of which in the Arab tongue means the Gate of Tears. To 20 miles in breadth, it is only 32 in length, and for the Nautilus, starting at full speed, the crossing was scarcely the work of an hour. But I saw nothing, not even the island of Perim, with which the British government has fortified the position of Aden. There were too many English or French steamers of the line of Suez to Bombay, Calcutta to Melbourne, and from Bourbon to Mauritius, furrowing the narrow passage, for the Nautilus to venture to show itself. So it remained prudently below. At last, about noon, we were in the waters of the Red Sea. I would not even ask to seek to understand the caprice which had decided Captain Nemo upon entering the Gulf. But I quite approved of the Nautilus entering it. Its speed was lessened. Sometimes it kept on the surface. Sometimes it dived to avoid a vessel, and thus I was able to observe the upper and lower parts of this curious sea. The 8th of February, from the first dawn of day, Mocha came in sight. Now a ruined town, those walls would fall at a gunshot, yet which shelters here and there some verdant date trees. Once an important city containing 6 public markets and 26 mosques, and whose walls, defended by 14 forts, formed a girdle of 2 miles in circumference. The Nautilus then approached the African shore, where the depth of the sea was greater. There, between the two waters, crystal as clear, through the open panels, we were allowed to contemplate the beautiful bushes of brilliant coral and large blocks of rock clothed in a splendid fur of green algae and fuci, or fukai. What an indescribable spectacle! And what variety of sights and landscapes along these sandbanks and volcanic islands, which bound the Libyan coast. But where these shrubs appeared in all their beauty was on the eastern coast, which the Nautilus soon gained. It was on the coast of the Tahama, for there not only did this display the zoophytes flourished beneath the level of the sea, but they also formed picturesque interlacings which unfolded themselves about 60 feet above the surface, more capricious but less highly colored than those of the freshness, were kept up by the vital powers of the water. What charming hours I passed thus at the window of the saloon! What new specimens of submarine flora and fauna did I admire under the brightness of our electric lantern! The 9th of February, the Nautilus floated in the broadest part of the Red Sea, which is comprised between Sokin of the west coast and Komfida of the east coast, with a diameter of 90 miles. That day at noon, after our bearings were taken, Captain Nemo mounted the platform where I happened to be, and I was determined not to let him go down again without at least pressing him regarding his ulterior projects. As soon as he saw me, he approached and graciously offered me a cigar. "Well, sir, does the Red Sea please you? Have you sufficiently observed the wonders it covers, its fishes, its zoophytes, its parterres of sponges, and its forests of coral? Did you catch a glimpse of the towns on its borders?" "Yes, Captain Nemo," I replied, "and the Nautilus is wonderfully fitted for such study." "Ah, it is an intelligent boat." "Yes, sir, intelligent and invulnerable. It fears neither the terrible tempests of the Red Sea, nor its currents, nor its sandbanks." "Certainly," said I, "the sea is quoted as one of the worst, and in the time of the ancients, if I am not mistaken, its reputation was detestable." "Detestable, Monsieur Arnaud. The Greek and Latin historians do not speak favorably of it, and Strabo says it is very dangerous during the estuarine winds of the rainy season. The Arabian Edrisi portrays it under the name of the Gulf of Kozulum, and relates that vessels perished there in great numbers on the sandbanks that no one would risk sailing in at night. It is, he pretends, a sea subject to fearful hurricanes, strewn with inhospitable islands, and which offers nothing good either on its surface or in its depths. One may see, I replied, that these historians never sailed on board the Nautilus. Just so, replied the captain, smiling, and in that respect, moderns are not more advanced than the ancients. It required many ages to find the mechanical power of the steam. Who knows if in another 100 years we may not see a second Nautilus? Progress is slow, Monsieur Arnaud. It is true, I answered. Your boat is at least a century before its time, perhaps an era. What a misfortune that secret of such an invention should die with its inventor. Captain Nemo did not reply. After some minutes, silence continued. And then he continued. You were speaking of the opinions of the ancient historians upon the dangerous navigation of the Red Sea. It is true, said I, but were not their fears exaggerated? Yes and no, Monsieur Arnaud, replied Captain Nemo, who seemed to know the Red Sea by heart. That which is no longer dangerous for a modern vessel, well rigged, strongly built, and master of its own course, thanks to the obedient steam, offered all sorts of perils to the ships of the ancients. Picture yourself, those first navigators, venturing in ships made of planks, sewn with the cords of a palm tree, saturated with the grease of the sea dog, and covered with powdered resin. They had not even instruments wherewith to take their bearings, and they went by guess amongst currents, by which they scarcely knew anything. Under such conditions, shipwrecks were, and must have been, numerous. But in our time, steamers running between Suez and the South Seas have nothing more to fear than the fury of this Gulf, in spite of the contrary trade winds. The captain and passengers do not prepare for their departure by offering proprietary sacrifices, and, on their return, they no longer go ornamented with wreaths and gilt fillets to thank the gods in the neighboring temple. I agree with you, said I, and steam seems to have killed all gratitude in the hearts of the sailors. But, Captain, since you seem to have especially studied this sea, can you tell me the origin of its name? There exist several explanations on the subject, Monsieur Arnaud. Would you like to know the opinion of the chronicler of the 14th century? Willingly. This fanciful writer pretends that its name was given to it after the passage of the Israelites, when Pharaoh perished and the waves which closed at the voice of Moses. A poet's explanation, Captain Nemo, I replied, but I cannot content myself with that. I ask you for your personal opinion. Here it is, Monsieur Arnaud. According to my idea, we must see the appellation of the Red Sea a translation of the Hebrew word Edom, and if the ancients gave it that name, it was on account of the particular color of its waters. But up to this time, I have seen nothing but transparent waves, and without any particular color, very likely. But as we advance to the bottom of the Gulf, you will see this singular appearance. I remember seeing the Bay of Tor entirely red, like a sea of blood. And you attribute this color to the presence of microscopic seaweed? Yes. So, Captain Nemo, it is not the first time you have overrun the Red Sea on board the Nautilus. No, sir. As you spoke a while ago of the passage of the Israelites and of the catastrophe to the Egyptians, I will ask whether you have met with traces under the water of this great historical fact. No, sir, and for good reason. What is it? It is the spot where Moses and his people passed is now so blocked up with sand that the camels can barely bathe their legs there. You can well understand there would not be water enough for my Nautilus. And the spot, I asked? The spot is situated a little above the Isthmus of the Suez, in the arm which formerly made a deep estuary, when the Red Sea extended to the Salt Lakes. Now, whether this passage were miraculous or not, the Israelites, nevertheless, crossed there to reach the Promised Land. The Pharaoh's army perished precisely on that spot, and I think that excavations made in the middle of the sand would bring to light a large number of arms and instruments of Egyptian origin. That is evident, I replied, and for the sake of archaeologists, let's hope that these excavations will be made sooner or later. When the towns are established, or the isthmus, after the construction of the Suez Canal, a canal, however, very useless to a vessel like the Nautilus. Very likely, but um, a useless canal. I'm sorry. Very likely, but a useful canal to the whole world, said Captain Nemo. The ancients well understood the utility of the communication between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean for their commercial affairs, but they did not think of digging a canal direct, and took the Nile as an intermediate. Very probably the canal which united the Nile and the Red Sea was begun by the Sesostris, if we may believe tradition. One thing is certain, that in the year of 615 before Jesus Christ, Necros undertook the works of an alimentary canal to the waters of the Nile across the plain of Egypt, looking towards Arabia. It took 4 days to go up this canal, and it was so wide that 2 triremes could go abreast. It was carried by the Darius, the son of Hypaspes, and probably finished by Ptolemy II. Strabo saw it navigated, but its decline from the point of departure near Barabastes to the Red Sea was so slight that it only was navigable for a few months out of the year. This canal answered all commercial purposes to the age of Antonius, when it was abandoned and blocked up with sand. Restored by order of the Caliph Omar, it was definitely destroyed in 761 or 762 by the Caliph of Al-Mansur, who wished to prevent the arrival of provisions to Muhammad bin al-Badallah, who had revolted against him. During the expedition into Egypt, your General Bonaparte discovered traces of works in the desert of the Suez, and surprised by the tide, he nearly perished before regaining Hardardrath, at the very place where Moses had encamped for 3,000 years before him. Well, Captain, what the ancients dared not undertake, this junction between the two seas, which will shorten the road from Cadiz to India, Messrs. Lesseps has succeeded in doing, and before long he will have changed Africa into an immense island. Yes, Monsieur Arnaud, you have the right to be proud of your countrymen. Such a man brings more honor to a nation than great captains. He began, like so many others, with disgust and rebuffs, but he has triumphed, for he has the genius of will, and it is said, or I should say it is sad, to think that a work like that, which ought to have been an international work, and which would have sufficed to make a reign illustrious, should have succeeded by the energy of one man. All honor to Monsieur Lesseps. Yes, all honor to the great citizen, I replied, surprised by the manner in which Captain Nemo just had spoken. Unfortunately, he continued, I cannot take you through the Suez Canal, but you will be able to see the long jetty of the Port Said after tomorrow, when we shall be in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean, I exclaimed. Yes, sir. Does that astonish you? What astonishes me is to think that we shall be there the day after tomorrow. Indeed. Yes, Captain, although by this time I ought to have accustomed myself to be surprised at nothing, since I have been on board your boat. But the cause of this surprise? Well, it is the fearful speed you will have to put on the Nautilus, if the day after tomorrow she is to be in the Mediterranean, having made the round of Africa, the doubled of the Cape of Good Hope. Who told you that we would make round of Africa and double the Cape of Good Hope, sir? Well, unless the Nautilus sails on dry land and passes above the isthmus, or beneath it, Monsieur Arnaud. Beneath it? Certainly, replied Captain Nemo quietly. A long time ago, nature made under this tongue of land what man has this day made on the surface. What? Such a passage exists? Yes, a subterranean passage, which I have named Arabian Tunnel. It takes us beneath Suez and opens into the Gulf of Pelusium. But this isthmus is composed of nothing but quicksands to certain depth, but at 50 yards only there is a solid layer of rock. Did you discover this passage by chance? I asked, more and more surprised. Chance and reasoning, sir, and by reasoning even more than by chance. Not only does this passage exist, but I have profited by it several times. Without that, I should not have ventured this day into the impassable Red Sea. I noticed that in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean there existed a certain number of fishes of a kind perfectly identical. Certain of the fact, I asked myself, was it possible that there was no communication between the two seas? If there was, the subterranean current must necessarily run from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, from the sole cause of difference of level. I caught a large number of fishes in the neighborhood of the Suez. I passed a copper ring through their tails and threw them back into the sea. Some months later, on the coast of Syria, I caught some of my fish ornamented with the ring. Thus the communication between the two proved. I then sought for it with my Nautilus. I discovered it, ventured into it, and before long, sir, you too will have passed through my Arabian Tunnel. Part 2, Chapter 5, The Arabian Tunnel. That same evening, in 21 degrees 30 north latitude, the Nautilus floated on the surface of the sea, approaching the Arabian coast. I saw Jeddah, the most important counting house of Egypt, Syria, Turkey, and India. I distinguished clearly enough its buildings, the vessels anchored at the quays, and whose draught of water obliged them to anchor in the roads. The sun, rather low on the horizon, struck full on the houses of the town, bringing out their whiteness. Outside, some wood cabins, and some made of reed, showed the quarter inhabited by the Bedouins. Soon Jeddah was shut out from view and the shadows of the night, and the Nautilus found herself under the water slightly phosphorescent. The next day, the 10th of February, we sighted several ships running to windward. The Nautilus returned to its submarine navigation, but at noon, when her bearings were taken, the sea being deserted, she rose again to her waterline. Accompanied by Ned and Conseil, I seated myself on the platform. The coast on the eastern side looked like a mass faintly printed upon a damp fog. We were leaning on the sides of the pinnacle, talking of one thing or another, when Ned Land, stretching out his hand towards the spot of the sea, said, "Do you see anything there, sir?" "No, Ned," I replied, "but I have not your eyes. You will know." "Look well," said Ned. "There, on the starboard beam, about the height of the lantern, do you not see a mass which seems to move?" "Certainly," said I, after close attention. "I see something like a long black body on top of the water." And certainly, before the long black object was not more than a mile from us, it looked like a giant sandbank deposited on the open sea. It was gigantic. Ned Land looked eagerly. His eyes shone with covetousness at the sight of the animal. His hand seemed ready to harpoon it. One would have thought he was awaiting the moment to throw himself into the sea and attack it in its element. At this instant, Captain Nemo appeared on the platform. He saw the dugong, understood the Canadian's attitude, and addressing him said, "If you held a harpoon just now, Master Land, would it not burn your hand?" "Just so, sir. And you would not be sorry to go back for one day to your trade of a fisherman, and to add this cetacean to the list of those you have already killed?" "I should not, sir." "Well, you can try." "Thank you, sir," said Ned Land, his eyes flaming. "Only," continued the captain, "I advise you, for your own sake, not to miss the creature." "Is the dugong dangerous to attack?" I asked, in spite of the Canadian's shrug of the shoulders. "Yes," replied the captain. "Sometimes the animal turns upon its assailants and overturns their boat. But for Master Land, this danger is not to be feared. His eye is prompt, his arm is sure." At this moment, 7 men of the crew, mute and immovable as ever, mounted the platform. One carried a harpoon and a line similar to those employed in catching whales. The pinnacle was lifted from the bridge, pulled from its socket, and let down into the sea. 6 oarsmen took their seats and, with the coxswain, went to the tiller. Ned, Conseil, and I went to the back of the boat. "You are not coming, Captain?" I asked. "No, sir, but I wish you good sport." The boat put off, and then, lifted by 6 rowers, drew rapidly towards the dugong, which floated about 2 miles from the Nautilus. Arrived some cable's length from the cetacean, the speed slackened and the oars dipped noiselessly into the quiet waters. Ned Land, harpoon in hand, stood in the forepart of the boat. The harpoon used for striking the whale is generally attached to a long cord which runs out rapidly as the wounded creature draws it after him. But here the cord was not more than 10 fathoms long, and the extremity of it attached to a small barrel which, by floating, was to show the course of the dugong when it took under the water. I stood and carefully watched the Canadian's adversary. The dugong, which also bears the name of halicore, closely resembles a manatee. Its long body terminated in a lengthened tail, and its lateral fins in perfect fingers. Its difference from the manatee consisted of its upper jaw, which was armed with 2 long and pointed teeth which formed on each side of the diverging tusks. This dugong, which Ned Land was preparing to attack, was of colossal dimensions. It was more than 7 yards long. It did not move, and it seemed to be sleeping on the waves, which circumstance made it easier to capture. The boat approached within 6 yards of the animal. The oars rested on the row blocks. I half rose. Ned Land, his body thrown back a bit, brandished the harpoon in his experienced hand. Suddenly, a hissing sound was heard, and the dugong just disappeared. The harpoon, although thrown with great force, had apparently only struck the water. "Curse it!" exclaimed the Canadian furiously. "I have missed it." "No," said I, "the creature is wounded. Look at the blood, but your weapon has not stuck in his body." My harpoon, cried Ned Land. The sailors rowed on, and the coxswain made for a floating barrel. The harpoon regained, we followed in pursuit of the animal. The latter came down now and then to the surface to breathe. It would not have weakened it, for it shot onwards with great rapidity. The boat, rowed by strong arms, flew on its track. Several times it approached within some yards, and the Canadian was ready to strike, but the dugong made off with a sudden plunge, and it was impossible to reach it. Imagine the passion which excited impatient Ned Land. He hurled at the unfortunate creature the most energetic expletives in the English tongue. For my part, I was only vexed to see the dugong escape all our attacks. We pursued it without relaxation for an hour, and I began to think that it would prove difficult to capture, when the animal, possessed with powers and the perverse idea of vengeance on which he had caused to repent, turned upon the pinnacle and assailed us in its turn. The man of war did not escape the Canadian. "Look out!" he cried. The coxswain did some words in his outlandish tongue, doubtless warning the men to keep their guard. The dugong came within 20 feet of the boat, stopped, sniffed the air briskly, and with its large nostrils did not pierce the extremity, but the upper part of its muzzle. Then, taking a spring, he threw himself upon us. The pinnacle could not avoid the shock, and half upset the ship at least 2 tons of water. But thanks to the coxswain, we caught it sideways, not full front, so we were not quite overturned, while Ned Land, clinging to the bows, bellowed the gigantic animal with blows from his harpoon. The creature's teeth were buried in the gunwale, and it lifted the whole thing out of the water, as a lion does to a roebuck. We were upset over one another, as a lion does. And I know not the adventure would have ended if the Canadian, still enraged by the beast, had not struck it to the heart. I heard its teeth grind on the iron plate, and the dugong had disappeared, carrying the harpoon with him, but the barrel soon returned to the surface, and, short of the body of the animal, turned on its back. The boat came up with it in tow and made a straight line for the Nautilus. It required tackle of enormous strength to hoist the dugong to the platform. It weighed 10,000 pounds. The next day, the 11th of February, the larder of the Nautilus was enriched by some more delicate game. A flight of sea swallows nestled on the Nautilus. It was a species of Sterna nilotica, particularly found in Egypt. Its beak is black, gray head, and pointed. The eye surrounded by white spots, and the back wings and tail in a grayish color. The belly and throat white, the claws red. They took some dozen of the Nile ducks, a wild bird of high flavor. Its throat and upper part of the head white with black spots. About 5 o'clock in the evening, we sighted to the north of Cape Ras Mohammed. This cape forms the extremity of the Arabia Petraea, comprised between the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. The Nautilus penetrated into the Straits of Julba, which leads to the Gulf of Suez. I distinctly saw a high mountain, towering between two gulfs of Ras Mohammed. It was Mount Horeb, that Sinai at the top of which Moses saw God face to face. At 6 o'clock, the Nautilus, sometimes floating, sometimes immersed, passed some distance from Tor, situated at the end of the bay, the waters of which seemed tinted with red, an observation already made by Captain Nemo. Then night fell, in the midst of heavy silence, sometimes broken by the cries of the pelican and other night birds, and the noise of the waves breaking upon the shore, chafing against the rocks, panting, some far-off steamer beating the waters of the Gulf with its noisy paddles. From 8 to 9 o'clock, the Nautilus remained fathoms under the water. According to my calculation, we must have been near the Suez. Through the panel of the saloon, I saw the bottom of the rocks brilliantly lit up by our electric lamp. We seemed to be leaving the straits behind us, more and more. At 9:15, the vessel having returned to the surface, I mounted the platform. Most impatient to pass through Captain Nemo's tunnel, I could not stay in one place, so came to breathe the fresh night air. Soon in the shadow I saw a pale light, half discolored by the fog, shining about a mile from us, a floating lighthouse, said someone near me. I turned and saw the captain. "It is the floating light of the Suez," he continued. "It will not be long before we gain entrance to the tunnel." "The entrance cannot be easy." "No, sir. For that reason I am accustomed to go into the steersman's cage and myself direct our course. And now, if you will go down, Monsieur Arnaud, the Nautilus is going under the waves and will not return to the surface until we have passed through the Arabian Tunnel." Captain Nemo led me towards the entrance of the central staircase. Halfway down, he opened the door, traversed the upper deck, and landed in the pilot's cage, which, it may be remembered, rose at the extremity of the platform. It was a cabin measuring 6 feet square, very much like that occupied by the pilot on the steamboats of the Mississippi or the Hudson. In the midst worked a wheel, placed vertically and caught to the tiller rope, which ran to the back of the Nautilus, 4 light ports with lenticular glasses led in a groove in the partition of the cabin, allowed the man at the wheel to see in all directions. This cabin was dark, but soon my eyes accustomed themselves to the obscurity, and I perceived the pilot, a strong man with his hands resting on the spokes of the wheel. Outside, the sea appeared vividly lit up by the lantern, which shed its rays from the back of the cabin to the other extremity of the platform. "Now," said Captain Nemo, "let us try to make our passage." Electric wires connected the pilot's cage with the machinery room, and from there the captain could communicate simultaneously to the Nautilus the direction and the speed. He pressed a metal knob, and at once the speed of the screw diminished. I looked in silence at the high straight wall we were running by at this moment, the immovable base of the massive sandy coast. We followed it thus for an hour, only some few yards off. Captain Nemo did not take his eye from the knob, suspended by it, its 2 concentric circles in the cabin. A simple gesture, the pilot modified the course of the Nautilus every instant. I had placed myself at the port scuttle, and saw some magnificent substructures of coral, zoophyte, seaweed, and fucus agitating their enormous claws, which stretched from the fissures of the rock. At 10:15, the captain himself took the helm. A large gallery, black and deep, opened before us. The Nautilus went boldly into it. A strange roaring was heard round its sides. It was the waters of the Red Sea, which the incline of the tunnel precipitated violently towards the Mediterranean. The Nautilus went with the torrent, rapid as an arrow, in spite of the efforts of the machinery, which, in order to offer more efficient resistance, beat the waves with the reverse screw. On the walls of the narrow passage I could see nothing but brilliant rays, straight lines, furrows of fire, traced by the great speed under the brilliant electric light. My heart beat fast. At 10:35, Captain Nemo quitted the helm, and turning to me, said, "The Mediterranean." In less than 20 minutes, the Nautilus, carried along by the torrent, had passed through the Isthmus of the Suez. Chapter 6: The Grecian Archipelago. The next day, the 12th of February, at the dawn of day, the Nautilus rose to the surface. I hastened on the platform. 3 miles to the south of the dim outline of the Pelusium was to be seen. A torrent had carried us from one sea to the other. About 7 o'clock, Ned and Conseil joined me. "Well, Sir Naturalist," said the Canadian, in a slightly jovial tone, "and the Mediterranean?" "We are floating on its surface, friend Ned." "What?" said Conseil. "This very night?" "Yes, this very night. In a few minutes we have passed this impassable isthmus." "I do not believe it," said the Canadian. "Then you are wrong, Master Land," I continued. "This low coast, which rounds off to the south, is the Egyptian coast, and you have seen such as with your own eyes. Ned, you can see the jetty of the port of Said, stretching into the sea." The Canadian looked attentively. "Certainly you are right, sir, and your captain is a first-rate man. We are in the Mediterranean. Good. Now, if you will please let us talk of our own little affair, but so that no one hears us." I saw that the Canadian wanted, and in my case, or in any case, I thought it better to let him talk as he wished. So we all went there, 3 of us, and sat down near the lantern, where we were less exposed to the spray of the blades. "Now, Ned, we listen. What have you to tell us?" "What have I to tell you is very simple. We are in Europe, and before Captain Nemo's caprices drag us once more to the bottom of the polar seas, or lead us into Oceania, I ask to leave the Nautilus." I wished in no way to shackle the liberty of my companions, but I certainly felt no desire to leave Captain Nemo. Thanks to him, and thanks to his apparatus, I was each day nearer the completion of my submarine studies, and I was rewriting my book of submarine depths in its very element. Should I ever again have such an opportunity of observing the wonders of the ocean? No, Certainly not. And I could not bring myself to the idea of abandoning the Nautilus before the cycle of investigation was accomplished. Friend Ned, answer me frankly. Are you tired of being on board? Are you sorry that destiny has thrown us into Captain Nemo's hands? The Canadian remained some moments without answering. Then, crossing his arms, he said, Frankly, I do not regret this journey under the seas. I shall be glad to have made it. But, now that it is made, let us be done with it. That is my idea. It will come to an end, Ned. Where and when? When I do not know, and where and when I cannot say. Or rather, I suppose it will end when these seas have nothing more to teach us. Then what do you hope for? Demanded the Canadian. That circumstances may occur as well, in 6 months hence, as now, by which we may and ought to profit. Oh, said Ned Land, and where shall we be in 6 months, if you please, Sir Naturalist? Perhaps in China. You know, the Nautilus is a rapid traveler. It goes through the water as swallows through the air, or as an express on the land. It does not fear frequented seas. You cannot say that it may not beat the coasts of France, England, or America, on which flight may be attempted as advantageously as here. Monsieur Arnaud, replied the Canadian, your arguments are rotten at the foundation. You speak in the future. We shall be there. We shall be here. I speak in the present. We are here, and we must profit by it. Ned Land's logic pressed me hard, and I felt myself beaten on the ground. I knew not what argument would now tell in my favor. Sir, continued Ned, let us suppose an impossibility. If Captain Nemo should this day offer you your liberty, would you accept it? I do not know, I answered. And if, he added, the offer made you this day was never to be renewed, would you accept it? Friend Ned, this is my answer. Your reasoning is against me. We must not rely on Captain Nemo's goodwill. Common prudence forbids him to set us at liberty. On the other side, prudence bids us profit by the first opportunity to leave the Nautilus. Well, Monsieur Arnaud, that is wisely said. Only one observation, just one. The occasion must be serious, and our first attempt must succeed. If it fails, we shall never find another, and Captain Nemo will never forgive us. All that is true, replied the Canadian, but your observation applies equally to all attempts at flight, whether in 2 years' time or 2 days. But the question is still this. If a favorable opportunity presents itself, it must be seized. Agreed. And now, Ned, will you tell me what you mean by favorable opportunity? It will be that which on a dark night will bring the Nautilus a short distance from some European coast, and you will try to save yourself by swimming? Yes, if we were near enough to the bank, and if the vessel was floating at the time, not if the bank was far away and the boat was underwater. And in that case? In that case, I should seek to make myself master of the pinnacle. I know how it is worked. We must get inside, and the bolts, once drawn, we shall come to the surface of the water without even the pilot, who is in the bows, perceiving our flight. Well, Ned, watch for the opportunity, but do not forget that a hitch will ruin us. I will not forget, sir. And now, Ned, would you like to know what I think of your project? Certainly, Monsieur Arnaud. Well, I think I do not say I hope. I think that this is a favorable opportunity that will never present itself. Why not? Because Captain Nemo cannot hide from himself that we have not given up all hope of regaining our liberty, and he will be on his guard, above all, in the seas and in the sight of the European coasts. We shall see, replied Ned Land, shaking his head determinedly. And now, Ned Land, I add, let us stop here. Not another word on this subject. The day that you are ready, Come and let us know, and we will follow you. I rely entirely upon you." Thus ended a conversation which, at no very distant time, led us to such grave results. I must say here that facts seem to confirm my foresight, to the Canadians' great despair. Did Captain Nemo distrust us in these frequented seas, or did he only wish to hide himself from the numerous vessels of all nations which plowed the Mediterranean? I could not tell, but we were oftener between waters and far from the coast, or if the Nautilus did emerge, nothing was to be seen but the pilot's cage, and sometimes it went to great depths, for between the Grecian archipelago and the Asia Minor, we could not touch the bottom by more than 1,000 fathoms. Thus, I only knew we were near the islands of Carpathos, one of Sporades, by Captain Nemo reciting these lines from Virgil: Est Carpathio Neptuni gurgite vates, Carelius Proteus, as he pointed to a spot on the planisphere. It was indeed an ancient abode of Proteus, the old shepherd of Neptune's flocks, now the island of Scarpanto, situated between Rhodes and Crete. I saw nothing but the granite base through the glass panels of the saloon. The next day, the 14th of February, I resolved to employ some hours in studying the fishes of the archipelago, but for some reason or other, the panels remained hermetically sealed. Upon taking the course of the Nautilus, I found that we were going towards Candia, the ancient isle of Crete. At the time I embarked on the Abraham Lincoln, the whole of this island had risen in insurrection against the despotism of the Turks. But how the insurgents had fared since that time I was absolutely ignorant, and it was not Captain Nemo, deprived of all land communications, who could tell me. I made no allusion to this event when the night had found myself alone with him in the saloon. Besides, he seemed to be taciturn and preoccupied. Then, contrary to his custom, he ordered both panels to be opened, and going from one to the other, observed the mass of waters attentively. To what end I could not guess. So, on my side, I employed my time in studying the fish passing before my eyes. In the midst of the waters a man appeared, a diver, carrying at his belt a leathern purse. It was not a body abandoned to the waves. It was a living man, swimming with a strong hand, disappearing occasionally to take a breath at the surface. I turned towards Captain Nemo, and in an agitated voice exclaimed, "A man! Shipwrecked! He must be saved at any price." The captain did not answer me, but came and leaned against the panel. The man had approached and, with his face flattened against the glass, was looking at us. To my great amazement, Captain Nemo signed to him. The diver answered with his hand, mounted immediately to the surface of the water, and did not appear again. "Do not be uncomfortable," said Captain Nemo. "It is Nicholas of Cape Matapan, surnamed Pesca. He is well known in all the Cyclades, a bold diver. Water is his element, and he lives more in it than on land, going continually from one island to another, even as far as Crete." "You know him, Captain?" "Why not, Mr. Arnaud?" Saying which, Captain Nemo went towards a piece of furniture standing near the left panel of the saloon. Near this piece of furniture I saw a chest bound with iron, on the cover of which was a copper plate bearing the cipher of the Nautilus with its device. At that moment the captain, without noticing my presence, opened the piece of furniture, a sort of strong box which held a great many ingots. They were ingots of gold. From whence came this precious metal, which presented an enormous sum? Where did the captain gather this gold from, and what was he going to do with it? I did not say one word. I looked. Captain Nemo took the ingots one by one and arranged them methodically in the chest, which he filled entirely. I estimated the contents at more than 4,000 pounds, weighted with gold. That is to say, nearly 200,000 pounds of royal currency. The chest was securely fastened, and the captain wrote an address on the lid in characters which must have belonged to modern Greece. This done, Captain Nemo pressed the knob. The wire of the communications with the quarters of the crew. 4 men appeared, and, not without some trouble, pushed the chest out of the saloon. Then I heard them hoisting it up the iron staircase by means of pulleys. At that moment, Captain Nemo turned to me. "And you were saying, sir," said he. "I was saying nothing, Captain." "Then, sir, if you will allow me, I will wish you good night." Whereupon he turned and left the saloon. I returned to my room, much troubled, as one may believe. I vainly tried to sleep. I sought the connecting link between the apparition of the diver and the chest filled with gold. Soon I felt certain movements of pitching and tossing, that the Nautilus was leaving the depths and returning to the surface. Then I heard the steps on the platform, and I knew they were unfastening the pinnacle and launching it upon the waves. For one instant it struck the side of the Nautilus, then all noise ceased. 2 hours after, the same noise, the same going and coming was renewed. The boat was hoisted on board, replaced in its socket, and the Nautilus again plunged under the waves. So these millions had to be transported to their address. To what point of the continent? Who was Captain Nemo's correspondent? The next day I related to Conseil and the Canadian the events of the night, which had excited my curiosity to the highest degree. My companions were not less surprised than myself. "But where does he take his millions to?" asked Ned Land. To that there was no possible answer. I returned to the saloon, after having breakfast, to set to work. Till 5 o'clock in the evening I employed myself in arranging my notes. At that moment, ought I to attribute it to some peculiar idiosyncrasy? I felt so great a heat that I was obliged to take off my coat. It was strange, for we were under low altitudes, and even then the Nautilus, submerged as it was, ought to experience no change in temperature. I looked at the manometer. It showed a depth of 60 feet, to which atmospheric heat could never attain. I continued my work, but the temperature rose to such a pitch as to be intolerable. Could there be a fire on board? I asked myself. I was leaving the saloon when Captain Nemo entered. He approached the thermometer, consulted it, and, turning it to me, said, 42 degrees. "I have noticed it, Captain," I replied, "and if it gets much hotter, we cannot bear it." "Oh, sir, it will not get hotter, if we do not wish it to." "You can reduce temperature as you please, then?" "No, but I can go further from the stove which produces it." "It is outward, then?" "Certainly. We are floating in a current of boiling water." "Is it possible?" I exclaimed. "Look." The panels opened, and I saw the sea entirely white. All around, a sulphurous smoke was curling amid the waves, which boiled like water in a copper. I placed my hand on one of the panes of glass, but the heat was so great that I quickly took it off again. "Where are we?" I asked. "Near the island of Santorin." "Sir," replied the captain, "I wish to give you a sight of this curious spectacle of submarine eruption." "I thought," said I, "that the formation of these new islands was ended." "Nothing is ever ended in the volcanic parts of the sea," replied Captain Nemo, "and the globe is always being worked by subterranean fires. Already, in the 19th year of our era, according to Cassiodorus and Pliny, a new island, Thea the Divine, appeared in the very place where these isles have recently been formed. Then they sank under the waves to rise again in the year of 69. When they again subsided, since that time to our days, the Plutonian work has been suspended. But on the 3rd of February, 1866, a new island, which they named George Island, emerged from the midst of the sulphurous vapor near Nea Kamani. and settled again on the 6th of the same month. 7 days after, the 13th of February, the island of Apresha appeared, leaving between Neakamani and itself a canal 10 yards broad. I was in these seas when the phenomena occurred, and I was able, therefore, to observe all the different phases. The island of Afrasia, of round form, measuring 300 feet in diameter and 30 feet in height. It was composed of black and Beatrice lava, mixed with fragments of feldspar, and lately, on the 10th of March, a smaller island called Reka showed itself near Neakamani. And since then, these three have joined together, forming but one of the same island. And the canal in which we are at this very moment, I asked. Where is it? Replied Captain Nemo, showing me a map of the archipelago. You see, I have marked the new islands. I returned the glass. The Nautilus was no longer moving. The heat was becoming unbearable. The sea, which still had been white, was now red, owing to the presence of salts and of iron. In spite of the ships being hermetically sealed, an insupportable smell of sulfur filled the saloon, and the brilliancy of the electricity was entirely extinguished by the bright scarlet flames. I was in a bath. I was choking. I was broiled. We can imagine, or rather, we can remain no longer in this boiling water, said I to the captain. It would not be prudent, replied the impassive Captain Nemo. An order was given, the Nautilus tacked about and left the furnace it could not brave with impunity. A quarter of an hour after we were breathing fresh air on the surface, the thought then struck me that if Ned Land had chosen this part of the sea for our flight, we should never have come alive out of the sea of fire. The next day, the 16th of February, we left the basin which, between Rhodes and Alexandria, is reckoned about 1,500 fathoms in depth, and the Nautilus, passing some distance from Sergio, quitted the Grecian archipelago after having doubled Cape Matapan. And that, my friends, is the end of our reading this evening. We will continue, possibly Friday, tomorrow night, with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Indiana Holmes, and love to you all. Good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.